foods that contain the highest levels of taurine come from the sea, particularly seaweed and shellfish. Here it is graphically, so you can see how shellfish compared to other meat. The most concentrated source, though, is dried nori, the seaweed sheets used to make sushi. Land plants, however, have negligible amounts. So a singular focus on increasing dietary taurine risks driving poor nutritional choices, because plant-rich diets are associated with human health and longevity. I mean, energy drinks have taurine too, but slamming Monster, Red Bull, Rockstar cocaine is probably not the best option. The best choice would probably be to eat a healthy plant-based diet with supplemental taurine. It's such a simple molecule, it can be inexpensively synthesized, so you can just get pure taurine powder. Here's how it all breaks down. We can start with concentration. Pure taurine obviously has the most, then dried nori, then an average of clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops, then the average across 9 energy drinks, then finfish, including the highest, yellow sea bream, down to tuna, one of the lowest, then an average of chicken, beef, and pork. Nori is looking pretty good until you realize how light it is. To get 1 gram of taurine, you'd have to eat 10 servings a day, which is 40 sheets of nori, which, even if you could stomach it, would exceed your recommended iodine intake for the day. The easiest way to get a gram would be a quarter teaspoon of pure taurine powder, though 1 can of most energy drinks would do it, but then there's the issue of added sugars or artificial sweeteners. 2 daily servings of shellfish, there's a lot of shellfish, but certainly doable, easier than eating 8 daily servings of regular fish, or 18 servings a day of land animals. Here's the cost comparison. This is where taurine powder really shines. At as little as a penny per day when bought in bulk, it's 50 times cheaper than the next on the list. Now, I used a combination of canned and fresh shellfish for this comparison. If you just did like canned clams, it would be more like $2.50 a day. In terms of saturated fat and cholesterol, shellfish are extremely lean, though the dietary guidelines recommend that dietary cholesterol consumption be as low as possible. 90 is less than half an egg yolk. Allergies are an issue for some. Shellfish is actually the most common type of food allergy in the United States, affecting about 1 in 35 people, though it may be as high as 1 in 10, depending on the method of diagnosis. Allergies to land-based meat are rare, unless you've been bitten by certain types of ticks. Foodborne illness can also be a problem, particularly since shellfish, like oysters, are sometimes eaten raw. Usually it's just gastroenteritis, but can sometimes develop into serious infections. Shellfish are filter feeders, so they just pick up and concentrate pathogens from the environment. Most outbreaks are actually from human fecal pathogens, from sewage that gets into the water, or the overboard disposal of feces from boats. I guess I never really thought about that, but like most crews from oyster harvesting boats are just like tossing their waste overboard, and it may come back to bite them. How common is contamination of shellfish with foodborne human fecal viruses, like norovirus, the most common cause of foodborne gastroenteritis? Nearly 1 in 3 samples of shellfish carries this kind of fecal contamination that can make us sick, yet most consumers ignore the fact that shellfish usually comes from places polluted by untreated human waste, though fecal contamination is also found in 85% retail ground beef and turkey, about half of chicken, a third of pork. Thankfully, those meats are cooked, but still, contaminated poultry products probably cause the most food poisoning deaths, not shellfish. Then, anytime you're talking about the aquatic food chain, there are industrial pollutants. Pollution of the oceans is widespread and worsening, and pollutants include toxic heavy metals like mercury, microplastics, and industrial toxins like PCBs. Yes, we've been eating shellfish more than 100,000 years, but that was before we so polluted our waterways. Shellfish pump and filter such large quantities of water in their feeding processes that they just tend to accumulate a lot of contaminants, like heavy metals, so the consumption of contaminated shellfish can lead to neurological and developmental defects, reproductive and gastrointestinal disorders, and in extreme cases, death. That does seem a little extreme. They're talking about contamination with algal toxins. While filter feeding, shellfish can ingest toxic algae, which can produce 100 different natural toxins, so the shellfish can accumulate these toxins and pass them on to consumers. So although we refer to them as shellfish toxins, they're actually no more from the shellfish themselves than the human fecal viruses were. When humans ingest different toxins accumulated in seafood, they may exhibit different poisoning syndromes. There's paralytic shellfish poisoning, amnesic shellfish poisoning, neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, and diuretic shellfish poisoning. Symptoms-wise, these can include abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, severe headaches, confusion, agitation, sleepiness, memory loss, coma, loss of coordination, excessive scratching, tremors, heart arrhythmias, seizures, lethargy, inappetence — I'd never heard that word for loss of appetite — blindness, muscular twitches, behavioral changes, convulsions, and death, sometimes within hours. No antidotes are available. Sometimes neuropsychological symptoms can last for years. Some of the toxins may be carcinogenic, linked to a variety of different cancers. This may help explain cohort studies that found associations between colorectal cancer and the consumption of shellfish and shrimp, but of course it could also be the industrial pollutants. The bad news is that toxic algae blooms are getting worse thanks to climate change, but the good news is that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has established a surveillance program to test for toxins, so there are regulatory limits. Unfortunately, despite strong regulatory limits protecting people from acute poisoning, there's a growing body of evidence suggesting there are significant health consequences following repeat exposures to levels of an amnesic neurotoxin known as domoic acid, even when below current safety guidelines. Those in the Pacific Northwest, who eat a lot of razor clams, for example, with presumed safe levels, were found to be at risk for clinically significant memory problems. They are 5 or 6 times more likely to have problems with everyday memory, like having to check whether you actually did something, or forgetting to tell someone something important, or being forgetful day to day. The toxin doesn't seem to be affected by cooking, and the quote-unquote very high levels of consumption were just more than 15 clams a month. So Washington State tells its residents to eat less than that, but to reach a gram a day of taurine, you'd have to eat 10 a day, 300 a month. The bottom line is that even at levels deemed safe under current regulatory limits, algal toxins may not make mollusks the best source for taurine supplementation.